Savvy regards once again to the staff of student teachers at Nemata. This is the main professor recording in the early hours of the morning, October 3rd, 2019. And the title of this unit, Talk and Text, comes from an old song, well-known song, from Carlos Santana. And that would be, of course, Black Magic Woman. Now, as you know, that meme is somewhat misleading. I can certainly affirm that the magic of the Aeonic Mother comes in a spectrum of colors, from white to black, and including quite a few shades in between. So, no need to get fixated on the negative connotations of that particular meme. I'm just using it to lead into the subject here. I'm just invoking it to set up as the setup for my reflections on the Charlotte working. Of course, superficially speaking, black magic means something bad, something evil, something that good people don't do. And certainly the use of magic spells to kill would be included in that category by most ordinary people around the world, I would say. But of course, in the case of the Charlotte working, there is a huge question in play. And that is the question of the application of black magic / killing magic through the dreaming power of the Aeon Sophia. I don't have to tell anyone that the Aeon Sophia holds all the threads of life constantly in her hands, if you want to imagine she has hands. She holds all the threads of life and all the threads of death, and constantly weaves on her tapestry. The symbiosis of life on this planet is a continual interplay of life and death. The rotting of insects, the death of dragonflies, and the rotting of their bodies into the soil, the rotting of human bodies into the soil, regeneration of the soil. It's a continual process of black magic, her killing power. So I am going to assume that all of you are comfortable with this black magic meme due to putting it in the framework of planetary tantra and dissociating it from the usual cheap connotations of conventional thinking and superstition. Now you'll see that I've taken the liberty to glamorize this unit with some quite remarkable images, kicking off with the two women, I believe they would be Zapotec, Mexican Indians, decorated for the Day of the Dead celebration, which is a really big folk festival in Mexico. And that festival, of course, coincides with the Celtic festival of the Samhain, is that it? And All Souls Night and other European festivals of the native European peoples, which has been vulgarly turned into Halloween. And of course, that festival represents evidence of the acceptance of death by indigenous peoples and the necessity that they feel to remind themselves of it as a supernatural aspect of life, something that is unknown, because no matter what you may think happens, you don't really know what happens at the moment of death. Well, there are many reliable reports, actually, but it's a fundamental unknown for people. And whereas religions attempt to give an explanation on faith, or by fabricating an explanation of what happens after death, the more courageous and honest way to face it is in the way it has been done. And the festival of celebration of death is a recognition of its power, of its presence, but at the same time, recognition that it is something that can be benevolent as well as malevolent. Death appears in the human world as a natural process, and I venture to say that one would be an extremely lucky person today, an extremely lucky tad, if you conclude your life by dying what is called a natural death. In any case, death comes, and then there is the death that is inflicted by human animals. And these are two different realms of action, So what you see in the faces of these women, what do you see? What do you see? There's a kind of glamour, there's a kind of menace. It's a kind of threat display, actually. You know, I've talked about the Charlotte working in the context of threat display in the animal kingdom. At the end of the day, as I'm reflecting on it for you now, come to the conclusion that that's exactly what it was, and as such, it was entirely successful. But I'll get back to that point in a moment. So, the evil that operates in the human world is committed by other human creatures, by fiends and ghouls and psychotics and enemies of life and biophobic monsters. It's not an expression of supernatural evil coming out of the cosmos and reaching us through our own species. It's just human evil. And I'd say that we can agree that there's no way to overcome this evil that comes from our own species or from the archontically infected and deviated members of the human species, if you want to call them that, and that's pretty generous. There's no way to overcome it and work against it and hold it at bay without a deterrent. But a deterrent is meaningless. A deterrent is not a bluff. A deterrent is meaningless unless there is behind it the power and the skill to enforce that deterrent. So when you see animals in threat display, snarling at each other, whether they be domestic cats, domestic dogs, or whether they be animals in the wild, hyenas and lions, that's threat display. And very often the confrontation does not result in an actual engagement of violence. Very often it doesn't. But the threat display on both sides would not be effective if there were not the power and skill to back it up. And it's the same for us in the human kingdom. That is a great rule, a great moral or ethical rule taken from Gaian symbiosis. The deterrent must be backed up by a real capacity to act. Having said that, I must add that the capacity to act through violence and through the exertion of physical force in our world, in our domain, the human social order, the human kingdom, well, it's not given to everyone. And certainly everyone cannot take that responsibility. It is a responsibility undertaken by some members of the human community, no matter what that community may be. It may be a community of 600 people living somewhere in Montana, Oklahoma, or it may be a community of people living in Lower East Side, New York, downtown San Francisco. But it is a commitment of certain members of the community, and it is incorrect to expect that all members of the community can make that commitment, but those who are protected by those who make the commitment can give their respect and support to those who do. I've often said this. So I'm scrolling through the page of the unit here, and I'd like to start out in my reflection on the Charlotte Working by just reviewing for you how I got into it in the first place. So I felt instigated to undertake the Charlotte Working, you may recall, immediately upon completing the Gnostic investigation of the Mandela effect in October of 2017. And at that time, there were two memes that were operating strongly in my life, and they came through in just about everything I put out back then. Command performance and the Aeonic Mother has agency. And these two memes interplayed with each other. And so I felt compelled to deliver a command performance. Now, in a certain respect, the Mandela Effect Decoded investigation is a command performance. What is the command performance? Well, in one respect, it is the demonstration that the Aeonic Mother has agency. You see, once she has agency, she needs her witnesses to reflect to her that she has it. She needs her witnesses to share the knowledge among themselves that she has agency, and then in some manner to act in a way that shows her that they know she has it. You could say, well, I did that, the Mandela Effect. I did that along with those of you who stayed with me through that exercise. Didn't do it by myself. Who upheld it with me. You upheld it with me. And that was our command performance in response to the monumental event that the Aeonic Mother gained agency. So what then can you make of the Charlotte Working that followed immediately upon that? Well, what happened in September and October as the Charlotte Working, as the Mandela Effect Decoded sequence wound to its end, was that the internet was saturated with hype about this IT robot, Sophia. Absolutely saturated. And I took that as a threat display on the part of the transhumanist Zadok, who want to convince us that robots and IT can become more intelligent than we are, and that eventually they will replace us either in a benevolent way by becoming our servants and leaving us with nothing to do, or they will be malevolent. They will act in a malevolent way, and they will just take over the world and wipe us out, which is a completely ludicrous fantasy that isn't worth an afternoon session of pretending with a 5-year-old child. Show me a robot who can do the laundry, sort, wash, resort, iron, put away clothing. Show me a robot who can fix the leak of the garden hose. The threat display of the transhumanist, I don't know what to call them, the transhumanist fanatics. Yeah, they are fanatics. People like Elon Musk. The threat display of those fanatics typically uses absurd exaggeration. They claim that robots are going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, but in fact, there is no robot that can even do A, B, or C. So how in the fuck are they going to get to X, Y, and Z? And it only takes a little common sense to sit back and say, well, hey, wait a minute, if this is all true, and if the robotic sciences and the IT, interactive Android type mechanisms like Sophia are going to be engineered to do what these fanatics claim, let's see them do something simple and elementary in the first place. That would be convincing. Build a robot that can fix the leak in the garden hose. Build a robot that can weed the garden intelligently. So I was fed up, pissed off, and triggered by all of that Sophia bullshit that was coming out of the internet at that time. And it so happens that one talk that I made in response to it got the most talk, by far the most talk of any talk I ever gave on that channel. It got something like 25,000 views due to the fact that I was addressing an issue which was trending at the moment. If you bear in mind the basic rule of realism regarding threat, then you have to say that the transhumanist fanatics, with all of the threats and fears that they're propagating about robotics and IT overtaking the human species, fails the test. There is no effective deterrent behind the claims that they're making. Can you see that? So their threat display, in my opinion, is a failure. Nevertheless, at that time, I felt compelled to answer the threat display exhibited through Sophia with a threat display of my own.